Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us. And welcome one and all to another Thursday TeissTalk. We're actually on time this week. That's because I had to buy a new laptop because my last week was a little bit embarrassing. So hopefully we will carry on as normal without any hiccups this week. We are talking about zero trust today and why it's not a silver bullet. But before then, some parish notices, if I may. First off, welcome to our LinkedIn watchers. If you would like to join in fully and get the full event experience, LinkedIn folks, then do join us at the Teiss website where you can log in and you can also ask questions. And talking of questions, you know it's all coming, all of you regulars. If you want to win a much coveted TeissTalk mug, then please do post a question. If you go to the chat and make sure that it's you are sending the chats to everyone, then we can all see it. A little pull down. Anybody who's used Zoom before knows what they're doing here, really, in fairness, right? So it is the most interesting, the funniest, the toughest, or even potentially the only question. You will be a winner of a much collectible and coveted TeissTalk mug. So without further ado, let us move on. Can I invite onto the stage, please, Sasha, Karim, and JC? Hello, Sasha.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, Tom.
Absolutely. Hello, Karim.
Hi, Tom. How are you, everyone?
Very good. Thank you. And hello, JC.
Hi, Tom. It is good to be here again.
Absolutely. It's great. Karim, firstly, thank you. You are this week's sponsor. So thank you. All of our listeners are thanking you for the tea and biscuits they get through sponsorship. So thank you very much for that. We're especially enjoying the pink wafer ones this week. So let's move on, shall we, to our news item, which comes... Actually, it comes from in-house. We rarely see this. We often go outdoors, but this is from the Teiss website. It is Australia introduces mandatory ransomware payment reporting law. Well, I think this is great, actually. And the reason I think this is great is they often say, and here in the UK, when you're the object of petty crime, they say don't bother reporting it. The police aren't going to do anything. However, whatever that crime is, even e-crime or whatever, if you report it, it actually allows the police, if nothing else, to start collating data and make connections and look at the larger picture. I think this is exactly what this is. If people are paying, if organizations are paying ransomware, blackmail effectively to get their data back, whilst there's not a lot immediately that the law enforcement can always do, it does allow them to sort of investigate further and draw that bigger picture. Is this something that we're going to be seeing across more countries, do we think?
I'd be curious to see, because I know that Japan, I think it was several years back, maybe 2022, the government had prohibited payment of ransom for specific groups that were designated by a specific crypto asset address. So, I mean, this is kind of the first that I've heard in terms of reporting, which I think some of the kind of digital resilience regulations that are coming into play will also have certain reporting requirements as well. From my perspective, and I'd be interested to hear what the rest of the group thinks, I think it's just a matter of time. But I'm also interested, as I mentioned, about some of the actions in Japan, if it will become more prohibitive in terms of actually paying. So will countries start to prohibit this more, just around the narrative of, keeping the criminals alive and giving them their paychecks. But yeah, I'll pause there and see what JC and Karim think as well.
This is a very interesting, law to pass, because we do have some, similar, regulations in different countries. For example, the SEC in the United States require you to inform if your organization have suffered a major, cybersecurity incident. And of course, that may have been a ransomware attack or may have been something else, which kind of already covered this aspect, right? You have to make the SEC aware and the world aware that you have had been, have that breach. In terms of, forcing organizations to report this, I agree with Sasha. I think it's just a matter of time. I think every government across the world, well, not every, but most of the governments across the world will start to push this out. They have already started to push this out through, NIS2, DORA. You have to report, incidents that you have within your organization. I think this is just specific to ransomware, but I think we kind of already there. And one thing just to close is that when you just focus on one cyber attack or one cyber threat, which is ransomware, it kind of stopped the look, because, information security and hackers will continue to develop. There will, very soon enough, there will be a different attack, which we have never expected before, just like ransomware. So then what are they going to do? Just create a new regulation for that specific one? So I don't think that's the right way to go, but of course, let's see.
I agree with both of you. And obviously, the first step to solving a problem is to measure it. I mean, you basically get what you measure. So from that sense, it's good. But I mean, specifically, the SEC issue has been criticized that cybersecurity teams are already overloaded. And unfortunately, I think cybersecurity is being treated a lot of times as a compliance issue. And we all know that the check marks, adding more regulations looks good on its face, and the regulators want that. But is it really helping us be more secure? If I'm a business owner and I'm a CISO, and I'm in a hospital, the patients are dying literally, and you want to just get things moving, not paying the ransom, which of course is a problem because you have the double extortion. No guarantee they're not gonna come back. It's not really solving the problem. You need to move on. So I sympathize with the business owners and the security teams. And I think the sooner we also acknowledge it's not gonna be solved by just regulations, and we need really some to be proactive, and tech, it's going to make everybody's life sooner better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the morals and ethics aside of paying the ransom or not, and let's face it, we're never going to really address that. The reality is that people have to pay ransoms in order to continue to make business. But to add insult to injury, if you don't report that you've paid the ransom, you're going to get fined another £10,000. I mean, which is probably negligible, really, on the on the actual ransomware itself, and probably won't add anything to the to your insurance premiums. But nonetheless, it is, as you say, Karim, just another thing we've got to, on our checklist of got to do this, got to do that, got to do the other. Oh, and by the way, I might just have to fix the problem in the first place.
I think one thing, just to add to Karim's comment around the impact on security teams, I think there's an interesting challenge with the reporting to law enforcement as it relates to payment in terms of digital forensics investigations. So in terms of where the investigation is at that time of when reporting is necessary, it could cause challenges in defining what other information is needed to understand where the initial compromise had happened, how much access was actually given based on whatever privilege they had at the time of compromise. So I think there may be a challenge there, as well as the conflicting need to report to law enforcement, but also needing to continue your own internal investigations to fully understand what's happened. So I think that's another element just to consider as well.
Yeah. Friends of the show, Martin Hepworth has jumped in here, making a really interesting point. The UK stock market has had reporting for material events in general, not just a cyber thing. So what the Australian government have done here is make it very specific. rather than sort of saying, hey, if you got to hand over a lump sum of money or do anything that's material to the company, let us know. But this does apply across the board to every organization, not just financial institutions.
Sure, but I mean, I think the unique thing about cybersecurity has been that it operates at a very different timescale than other material, natural disasters or fraud. Stuff in the internet happens at the millisecond rate, and that's where the problem is. Like, what's the balance in that world in terms of reporting and being aware of it and the overhead on investigating? And also at the same time, if you report it and then the cyber criminals hear of that, it will, I mean, you have an adaptive adversary in that case, right? So, I mean, there's a balance there of how much advantage are you giving them and signals you're giving them. All in all, look, measuring, as I said at the beginning, measuring problems is very important, of accurate data, but sharing data is also going to be very important. But let's see how it plays out. I mean,
yeah. Just to close this off, Peter Fink, friend of the show as well, has he's made the point that actually fessing up and reporting incidents is a shameful thing. There's an element of victim blaming here, and the last thing companies want to do is to bring the media or the market's attention to them because of this. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of talk just in general society about victim blaming and the fact that very often, and certainly in this industry, when someone gets breached, it's somebody's fault on the inside, not that they are a victim of crime. Nobody victim blames, you know, somebody who gets mugged in the street, or it's, you know, generally speaking, you know, or if your house gets broken into or your car gets broken into. But it does seem like, yeah, I think there's an Australian term here, you know, chopping down tall poppies. So if you're attacked, if you've got a nice car and you're broken into, or if you've got a nice organization and you get, you know, breached, it seems like it's okay to pile in. And that's probably a big reason why organizations don't want to publicize this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a prime example, Tom. I'm sure everyone on the call and also joining has heard the Joe Sullivan case from Uber. So it was years ago, but he was so scared of it going out that he actually, you know, got an NDA set up with the threat actors themselves. So, you know, I mean, it was and still continues to be a major concern for those that are accountable at the end of the day.
Although on the flip side, with Joe Sullivan, he did break the law.
Yeah,
and he did. You know, it's a good example, but for many other reasons as well. Yes. Right, let's move on. Let's just sweep that under the carpet and move on, shall we? Let's talk zero trust. Now, you know, every year in the security industry, there is a buzzword. It's just so happens to be the last 2 years, and probably the next 2 years it's going to be AI, right? But every year there's normally a buzzword, and a good few years ago, or maybe 5 years ago, zero trust was that buzzword. And I remember at the time, you know, very disillusioned with what zero trust was. It was being sold as a silver bullet. It was being sold as a product in many cases, which was very confusing. I think now we've kind of, as a how can I put it, as an industry, we've come to terms that zero trust is actually a whole bunch of esoteric things. It's an attitude, it's a culture, it is technology, it is a bunch of other things, not just one thing here. So I think we've become more sort of grown up about it. But, you know, is zero trust network access? It's exactly the same thing, right? You know, we're not going to fix everything with this, despite what any of the vendors tell us.
I agree. I think actually, as much as I hate the term like everyone else, there is something there. As a framework, I'm going to mention two things that I think, if looked at from that angle, would actually add value to it. One, I think the term could be interpreted as what zero trust really advocates is resilience and protection when trust goes to zero. Like, there's nothing that's really zero. It's the trust as it erodes. How can you ensure the users or the machines, you still have protection for the data, which is what matters, and your operations. And the second one, I think the framework itself has been around for a while in the defense and classified world. And it's really the commercial sector catching up to what that world has been doing for decades, every day, all day. It's basically microsegmentation.
Interesting.
If you've ever seen it, you have paragraph markings. You know exactly the classification level of specific objects of data, and things are monitored closely. And if all we do is transfer some of these ideas which work and making them digital, I think it's going to be a big win and a move forward.
So why aren't we doing this more? What is so difficult about this? I mean, I was at a briefing recently. We talked about the legacy problem of data. So, for instance, the ability to categorize data, for instance, is massively difficult. The governance of that data, and if you've got all this unstructured data, how can you even sort of micro segment it in the first place when you don't even know what half of it is? You could start things moving forwards. You could start a better governance program and labeling and categorization, all that thing. But the sheer volume in the past, which because we're not in the military wasn't required to be like that, makes this a humongous problem for organizations. So can we really truly talk about zero trust in those concepts?
Yeah, I think most of the types of industry verticals that I'm currently working in are critical national infrastructure, manufacturing, industrial environments, and the amount of labor and resource and change management that's required to completely restructure network architectures, to reconfigure access controls in these very siloed, segregated IT and operational technology environments, I think sometimes it's too much of a project to chew. So they're doing it kind of piecemeal in terms of addressing different access control issues based on, exactly to Karim was saying earlier, how are they putting a metric towards the level of risk to a particular site, for example, or a particular asset. When you have assets that were put in the 1970s that cost, 100 million pounds, it's not really the easiest asset to replace and put into this new architecture that you're building to create this zero trust principle. So I think for certain industries, it is actually quite a difficult endeavor to intake, and not only just resource intensive, as I had mentioned earlier, but also financially, and trying to also get from the people aspect, a large population of engineers and operation workers and employees on the floor to now understand how to use that technology as well. So I think there are some challenges there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100% agree. I have experience of working in a very old manufacturing organization. And manufacturing is tended to use a lot of OT equipment and also tend to be very old. As Sasha said, it's very expensive to implement those solutions and complex. It takes, probably sometimes take years to fully implement a production line. So for you to what we have been able to achieve, and when I was working with this organization, is actually to work around it rather than trying to change the production line or the OT equipment and how it works, because it's just the organization just decide the risk is too high. It's just too expensive. It's too high. We cannot risk it. So let's do what we can around it. But that system or that, that production line or that OT sensitive production line that we have put in place 100 years ago will not change. It will remain the same. So yeah, it's very hard to always have zero trust across the business. That's why we need to focus very well on where we can do microsegmentation, how where we can apply more restricted data classification than data security, because it's just impossible for you to apply the same methodology across the business for some organization.
And let's face it, there's there's not a single silver bullet anyway in all of cybersecurity. You know, not when we've got risks that come through, insider threat and social engineering and the supply chain. Zero trust isn't necessarily going to address all of those anyway, right?
No, it's not. And I agree with both of you. I don't think anybody reasonable pretends that this is not going to take time. It's a framework, as I mentioned. It's going to take possibly decades. I'd like to think that in 10 years, this can help improve things, but who knows? And yes, there's no silver bullet, but there are things that work. I think as the world becomes more complex, and I hate to drop it, we haven't talked yet, I mean, so far for what, 20 minutes, haven't mentioned the word AI. I hate to be the first one to mention it.
You had to go and say it.
Look,
I thought we got away with it.
There is something there that's different than the previous decades. I mean, there are billion-dollar companies being created. I mean, I think it's fair to say all of us are using it on a daily basis, and it's going to help on both sides. So I think what's different this time is I think the automation and some parts of machine learning can help. I think I come from a background of cryptography, so I think the only way forward as things become more automated is to really focus on the basics. And there's nothing more basic in cybersecurity than encryption. And it works when you use it correctly. It's just a challenge to do that in practice. Look, the TLS, encrypting network traffic, is a huge success story. DNS security, cryptography has been added. So the first step is, as you mentioned, both of you, you have to discover the data, and this has to be automated, obviously. I'm going to claim that if you apply the principles of zero trust at the data, it could be less intrusive and disruptive than having to rip off the infrastructure. And the whole point of the internet and the TCP/IP stack is that you, at the highest layer, you're independent of the infrastructure. So there is a lesson to be learned there of securing the data at the object level inside files or containers, so that you have sort of security with it wherever it ends up. And of course, it can disrupt processing, but that's why you have privacy-preserving technologies like polymorphic encryption and secure multi-party computation, which are, I mean, they're still not the most practical ones and they don't scale, but we're going to get there. But we start today, and over time, you pick, for instance, your crown jewels, your HR data, your IP. Like you can, by monitoring the data better closely, you can understand which data is not being used as often and have accordingly different levels of protection.
But these are complex implementations, let's face it. And also, 5 years ago when Zero Trust came out, I think the phrase that was often used was, it's a journey, not a destination. It's been a 5-year journey so far. And maybe it's, as you said, it's going to be another 10, 15, 20 years, right? So it's which as intelligent human beings, we kind of understand, but boards and markets don't. If you see, they want results now. They want results within the next financial year before, all that sort of thing. And so using these kind of concepts is very difficult for the, I say, average organization, right?
Fair enough. But look, as an industry, okay, let's look at it from the other way. What's the other option?
Well, yeah. I
heard
the other option is to put people in a room and shout at them, shout PowerPoint at them once a year just to make sure they don't lose data. But, we all know how well that's going.
Yeah, I mean, a very nice term I've heard here from somebody at Stanford is, your competition is not going to be who you think they are. Your number one competition is donothing.com. That's always an option.
I'm looking them up now.
Yeah, that's always an option. But then what? So yeah. I understand there are challenges, but I actually disagree. I think you can see tangible results if you start classifying your data today and locking it down correctly immediately. Like you can see immediate improvement in your data and security posture. I just think, I guess, sure, the industry can do more friendly tools and more accuracy, but there are ways. It's just the willingness. sooner or later, every business should have a data protection program. It's just a matter of time till you hop on that. Anyway, I talk too much. I would like to.
Not at all.
I was going to say as well, Karim, on some of your points, I think you're absolutely right. It's also not like a one size fits all too, right? So, there's complementary security tooling that you need to have alongside this as well, like SIEM and so on and so forth. But for some organizations, and I'm sure all of us on the call and all of the audience have dealt with, all of the multi-factor, and I would even say beyond multi-factor on your banking applications and the user frustration behind that. And there might be an area for conversation around like continuous risk-based authentication. So looking at different authentication methodologies that adjust to the level of verification that's required based on the individual that is going into the particular asset, what access they have to that data. So once you've identified what that data looks like, to your point, Karim, then what is the next step in terms of, okay, well, this user actually is just going to have read-only rights. So we're okay with this level of authentication. However, this individual in finance or this individual in HR is actually having the ability to manipulate that data and potentially compromise the integrity of that data. So maybe we should have a higher level of verification for that individual. So I think, it's one of those things that whether you like it or not, your organization has to go through that exercise that you've talked about earlier, Karim, and JC has mentioned it as well, to understand, okay, well, what does that actually look like for us? And what areas can we deprioritize and what areas do we need to prioritize based on that risk exercise?
100% agree, yeah.
We've got a comment from Peter Fink again. Thank you, Peter. One of the more effective basic actions I've seen at is the automation of whole life cycle procedures for on and offboarding of staff. Permissions, including all hardware and encryption and certificates for data protection throughout. Pretty much zero touch. I mean, does that ring true?
Yes, yes, I think there are a lot of instances where we've also heard that doing this effectively is a first step, and it could prevent leak of some information afterwards. Absolutely.
The interesting part of that, though, as well, only because I've gone through an exercise for a client, is especially if you're operating in different jurisdictions, you're obviously going to have different data privacy requirements that may impact that employment life cycle in terms of what you're allowed to do from a due diligence in a kind of, let's call it, vetting perspective, in terms of what you can be monitoring and so on and so forth. So again, I think if you are an organization that operates across borders, there may need to be a country-specific approach for that life cycle. You might have a foundation that covers the organization globally, but there may be nuances based on, like, for example, I know Germany has quite strict controls around what data you're allowed to capture on your employees and so on and so forth. So I guess just a caveat. So when you do go through that exercise, that you may want to think about as well.
So the one of the points here that we're talking about as well is, identifying, classifying and securing sensitive data through automation. And I think, as Karim mentioned, we're using, AI as the solution to that. But again, chatting to people recently, one of the key things about AI and one of the key elements of AI is governance. And governance involves, the classification and the centralization of data and knowing what the data is and how it's going to be used by AI, and was clearly seen by the group I was chatting with as a prerequisite to using AI. So now we're stuck in a little bit of a loop. In order to use AI to manage our data more effectively, we need to manage our data more effectively in order to use AI. So we're kind of getting, stuck in a little bit of a loop here. Is this because the technology is moving too quickly, or, AI is not keeping up, or well, actually more likely governance not keeping up? But how do we break out of this cycle?
I'm happy, but I want to hear what JC has to say.
Hey, I said no silence, all right? We get, it's £1 for every second of silence between you lot.
No, I very much agree. So it's when we talk about data classification, it's a topic that we can talk for forever pretty much, because each organization will have a different approach, different system, different technology environment. And as Sashi and Karim say, one size never fits all. In terms of the governance and the speed of AI, we need to remember one thing, that the current AI that we have in our industry, the term AI, it's pure machine learning. So it's basically on data that already exists, and we understand that data in a nice, beautiful format, and then we train an application to be able to guess on that data that it has trained. It's the same thing when we're using classification. So if you have a type of data, if your organization work with a different type of data, you have a different type of IP, and it's a different format of information, the AI will not understand that data, so it wouldn't be able to classify it in accordance to your policies. So each organization, you will have to use different policies and different rules. And for you to be able to configure those policies and the rules to properly automatically classify your data and secure your data, you first need to understand your data. Otherwise, AI will be able to classify, but it will classify probably in the incorrect category, though you're not really, protecting your data as it should be protected. So yeah, I think it's a loop that currently we don't have a solution. No, we will have to understand the data to be able to properly classify in the correct policy, in the correct category, and apply the correct, policy for that data. At least this is, of course, my understanding at this point in time. There may be a tool in the market or a solution which helps this, or you don't need to understand your data to also create the policies. If there is, I would love to hear about it, but currently I do not believe we are at that position yet.
Yeah, I went to a really interesting talk recently that kind of touched on that, JC. So it's an AI platform that supports large GSIBs and financial organizations with compliance. And they were saying that they have to be really careful with what data they're feeding into the model in terms of additional information. So they're using the baseline of, websites that are government driven. So word for word, taken off, policies, procedures, regulatory requirements. But if individuals within the organization are adding information on top of that within the language model, the wording starts to get skewed from what the baseline is. So they have to curate kind of who is able to add information there and how they add it as well, so that the tool still works. I think we're already seeing that with the likes of ChatGPT and so on and so forth. So I think it kind of echoes to what you're saying around, okay, well, it could be really, really useful, but again, like there's a few challenges there that still have a big question mark around them.
Exactly. Yes.
So to pick up on Karim's point earlier, which was, this is the journey. It might have been 5 years, but we've got a period of time in front of us before zero trust is in place everywhere. And there's plenty of environments that have got legacy technology that has got no way of integrating into zero trust in the short term, hence why this is a long-term project. What are the other things that we should be doing to fill the gap before zero trust really sort of starts to bite in real terms? And the reason I say real terms as well is there's only been one company that's been wholly zero trust, and that was built by Google to demonstrate zero trust from the ground up, and has since been disbanded. So it's, there aren't great real use cases out there for us to model this on.
I think the number one issue is classification and discovery and of data. Databases and unstructured data. And I think actually unstructured data is the bigger problem, like documents, emails, messages. And I think just going to the last point, I think where you start is at a very simple thing. Let's just select 4 labels. if you can classify your data as public, internal, something that is regulated, which you can catch with old school regular expressions and natural language processing, not even bringing the new machine learning that requires, as JC said, your data. You start from there and you keep improving the accuracy. Look, even if you're at 80% or 70% accurate, which I believe you can get through smart analysis, multimodal engines, it's still better than not doing anything.
than being not effective at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we have to be pragmatic here. I mean, they always say perfect is the enemy of good. And as much as I have to say that, you have to, I mean, push for that. And I mean, we've been with the clients that have that resilience. And the challenge is, look, give us your data. You can classify it. There are other tools on the market can do it. But then what the clients want is not just like the moment you solve that problem, they immediately say, I want now an automated remediation. And that's what rubber meets the road. I mean, but
yeah.
I very much agree with that, because every time when you mention the word data classification or classification, organizations leadership go crazy, right? If I want to use the word, the better words to describe it, they literally go crazy. No, you will interrupt our business from operating as it is. People will not be able to access information, etc., etc. But as Karim say, because before the first solutions we have to manage data, classify data, they were so restrictive that now we have this really bad culture of let's not do data classification, let's not do data, good data control, because it's too expensive, it's time consuming, it's going to stop the organization from operating as it is. But the days of today, we have technologies which you can do step by step, as Karim said. You can literally just enable classification. It would not do anything, just the label. It would just classify data as public or internal or whatever you want to name it. And that already helped the organizations and the people and the end users to understand, oh, okay, the data is now classified. So you can actually bring the users in that journey with you. And as, of course, the company becomes more suspicious, or accept more of the change and understand what label means, then you can start to slowly apply the controls that will, secure that data. But you don't even have to apply the controls to enforce things to happen. You can just monitor the organization in the background and see how to best then apply and enforce controls to that data. So yeah, I think the days of today, we definitely have the technology, the processes, and the tools to do it in a way that is really non-impactful, frictionless to the organization. But it's changing that culture, right? How can we go to leaders, organizations that had really bad experience and prove to them that, hey, trust me or trust us, now we can do this properly. I think that's the hard thing. Once you do that, it's like a crystal, right? Once you break a crystal, you cannot bring it back with glass. You can try it, but there will always be, damage on it. So I think that's the position where we are today.
Yeah, I think that JC makes a really good point around that culture and also translating the activity and the risk to that board level and that strategic level. And I think still to this day, even though I think all of us say it all the time as security and IT professionals, is IT isn't siloed from enterprise risk. We used to view risk management in, the people, process, health and safety, and technology, but technology oversees all of that now. So, being able to translate to your strategic leaders and stakeholders that actually we're doing this exercise because this data allows you to function. And if you don't have access to it, then everything stops. And I think it's, again, back to the first point you made, Karim, is like, okay, well, what do they care about? They care about losses. They care about their balance sheet getting hit. So how can you translate to them, well, this data that you've not classified, so you don't actually know how much protection and security you should have around it. Therefore, if it was impacted, what would that actually look like to your organization? Would it knock out an entire site if it was an old manufacturing organization, to your point earlier, JC? What does that actually look like? So I think it's trying to take it back to basics and saying, look, this isn't just about the data itself. What is it doing for you? And getting them to understand what that is for them. And what is the impact? What's the business interruption? What's, like I said, how is it going to hit the balance sheet? And at the end of the day, impact them because that risk had been realized. So yeah, I think that the translation point is really, really important.
Yes, and if I just drop here to close on this topic, is what Sasha have said, in my opinion, is what I call the silver bullet. Making sure you get the communication right, and this is such a difficult topic that I know we cannot even, we can have a wake-up webinar to try to sort it out, and you never will get to a solution. But yes, be able to translate to the board and senior people that everything that you're planning and you expect, you're trying to do for the business, actually helping them to drive the business or continue to operate as they operate. And that is hard, that is difficult, and this is the silver bullet.
It's a great place to wrap it up, folks. Thank you. What we normally do at the end is we ask all of our participants, all of our panelists, sorry, to give some advice, excuse me, to our listeners. So let's make it practical. What is the one thing our listeners should be doing, our watchers should be doing, viewers, I think is what they're called these days, should be doing when they get back to their desks tomorrow morning? What, when it comes to zero trust, when it comes to, all of these topics, governance, etc. What's the one thing they should be doing? JC, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, because we're talking about data and a zero trust network, my recommendation is label your data with the simplest label possible. Just general, internal, whatever. Just label, and doesn't enforce any policy and rule or anything. Just bring the culture to the organization that data should be labeled, that data will be labeled. Continue, nice. Start with that, and then you will go, you will find the next steps throughout the way.
Very good. Sasha.
So I know I had mentioned and others the comment, one size doesn't fit all. So figure out your size. So what do you need to complement your access management solution? So is that EDR? Is that SIEM? Is that PAM? Behavioral analytics, so on and so forth. Figure that out. It's not just a t-shirt, it's a whole outfit. It's figuring out what are the other elements you need that are fit for purpose for your organization, based on your risk, based on your industry, and based on horizon scanning and what's going on in the threat landscape.
Thank you. And finally, to our very generous sponsor, Karim.
Thank you. I agree with both. Like, first step is label and discover, but you need to think about what the next step, which to me would be automatically protecting the data in a least disruptive way, which is basically focusing on the parts that are regulated or sensitive without disrupting the viewing of documents if we're going to focus on unstructured data. And that's possible. And technology exists to do this at scale. So you should at least look into this approach. I'm pretty sure it's something nobody has tried before, because that's the common reaction we get in the market. So I'll leave you with that.
Excellent. Very good. So it just behoves me to do three things. Firstly, thank you to our panelists, JC, Sasha, Karim. Thank you so much for your time, wit, wisdom, charm, and intelligence that you brought to today's conversation. Thank you. Secondly, winner of today's TeissTalk mug is going to be, I know both of them. Neither of them deserve it. I'll give it to Martin Hepworth. Thank you, Martin, for, well, not only your interesting point about the financial regulations, but also for correctly identifying that my replacement laptop was a Mac. And thirdly, I should say, we've got a really busy November for you with TeissTalk. We have got 4 TeissTalks in November. The next one is on the 7th, and it's why just-in-time security is leaving you exposed. That's on the 7th of November, 4 o'clock as usual. And finally, thank you all to our viewers. Thank you all to our panelists once again. Thank you, panelists. And to everybody at home, don't forget to stay secure, my friends.
Thank you so much, Thom. Thank you, everyone.
Nice meeting you.